What are some weird, real-life X-Files type mysteries? Redditor 2, the Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 Soviet students disappeared while hiking in the Ural Mountains. That in itself isn't particularly weird, apart from extremely unusual findings when the camp and bodies were finally located. Some of the bodies had signs of extreme trauma or were mutilated in ways that couldn't be explained by the normal hazards associated with the terrain. Most of the students had died of hypothermia, despite being experienced in winter hiking and so presumably knowing better than to leave the tent. There's a bunch of conspiracy theories about what caused them to rip the tent open from the inside. There didn't appear to have been an avalanche, flee and various states of undress, and what could have caused the injuries. They range from the Soviet military using the area as a testing ground for weapons to the hikers having stumbled upon a Yeti. The official investigation found that the hikers had been killed by an unknown, compelling force. Edit. I forgot to mention, as some commenters have pointed out, that the clothes of some of the victims allegedly showed high levels of radioactive contamination. Redditor 3, he insatiable terreur, a French man who could not stop eating. He was said to have an incredibly large mouth with stained teeth, and supposedly had a visible vapor rising off of his body. His parents kicked him out as a teenager because he was literally eating them out of house and home. He ate any and everything, including live animals, stones, silverware, anything he could get his hands on. The French military even tried employing him as a courier to smuggle documents by eating them. No doctor was able to find a cause or a cure to his appetite. He was eventually kicked out of the military hospital where they were studying him, after falling under suspicion of eating a 14-month-old child that went missing from the same hospital. A reasonable suspicion, since they caught him trying to eat dead bodies in the morgue on several occasions. Redditor 4, studying Cold War submarine history is always full of mysteries. Like, what did the USS Parche do that made it the most decorated submarine in the history of the Navy? Seriously, 9 presidential unit citations? Also, what did the USS Narwhal do and why was its construction so different from other subs? Edit. Someone asked how this relates to the X-Files. I didn't really mention the best story, only the ones I was really interested in. A true X-Files mystery would be Project Azorian, which sought to lift a sunken Soviet submarine from the ocean floor. Edit 2. I figured I'd also bring up the USS Scorpion, whose sinking is still debated by conspiracy theorists and naval scholars. Redditor 5. The death of Gloria Ramirez summary. A woman was brought into the ER suffering from late-stage cervical cancer. Her body had an oily sheen to it, her breath smelled like fruity garlic, her blood samples smelled like ammonia and had floating particles in it. Most of the people who worked on her got sick themselves. Redditor 6. The Oakville blobs. Gelatinous blobs fell from the sky in Oakville, Washington in the early 90s that made people sick and killed some animals. After testing, it was shown to contain human white blood cells. Redditor 7. The green children of Woolpit. 2 children, a brother and sister, mysteriously appeared. They claimed to have been from a dark world and were drawn to ours by a bell. Also, they were green. Redditor 9. The Tured mystery. Strange mystery of the man from Tured. Discus thread. A man shows up at an airport in Tokyo and his passport says that he's from a country called Tured. When asked to point to Tured on a map, he points to Andorra but is confused because he had never heard of Andorra before. The company that he claims to work for has no idea who he is, even though he had copious amounts of documentation to prove it. He was held in a hotel room guarded by 2 policemen while the police investigated the case. He disappeared from his room even though they were several stories up with no balcony. Redditor 11. The biggest mystery is how long it will take for a BuzzFeed-esque clickbait peddler to take the top responses and compile them into a list you won't believe. A lesser, related mystery is how anyone still reads those articles, which have degenerated to clicking to a new page to see the next paragraph of content. Trying to make a list of 10 items taken from askreddit into 30 AD impressions per person isn't a strategy, it is a cry of desperation. Redditor 14. For a mystery very close to the X-Files, you'd need to look at something like the Paul Benwitz case. He lived and worked close to the Kirtland Air Force Base and intercepted what he believed to be alien communications at what he called the Dulce Base. He very well may have been the target of a government operation where he was fed false information and documents verifying his alien hypothesis by intelligence agents working for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He was pushed to the brink and ended up in a mental health hospital, and his story is full of X-Files-esque intrigue like photographs of landed UFOs he took from the air. He was a private pilot being stolen from his house. There have been a few books written about it, the best being Project Beta by Greg Bishop. Redditor 26, UFO encounters occurring at U.S. military facilities is an interesting one to examine, where in some cases at the time of the UFO sightings, American conventional and nuclear missile systems mysteriously malfunctioned and shut down, with no credible reasoning or explanation given for these sudden failures. Sounds pretty crazy, right? Well, there is in fact quite a bit of official documentation and eyewitness reports from a bunch of quite credible military officials and contractors to back up many of these apparent close encounter UFO incidents that took place at or around various secure military facilities and missile systems over the years. Here is an example highlighting one bit of testimony of an incident that occurred at Maelstrom USAF Base Montana in 1967. In which 10 Minuteman nuclear missiles apparently mysteriously went offline when a UFO was reported by multiple individuals around the facility. Here is a brief video describing some of the testimony of this incident, and again, there were multiple eyewitnesses involved who have gone on the record about this UFO encounter. The 1980 Rendlesham Forest incident is another well-publicized and very interesting case which took place in England at the twin NATO air base facilities of RAF Woodbridge and RAF Benchwaters, and has plenty of official documentation to support that something very bizarre happened that night. During a nuclear missile test using a dummy warhead aboard that was flown out of Vandenberg AFB in California in 1964, there was another close encounter incident where a UFO was apparently caught on film. In this case, known as the Big Sur incident, the UFO was apparently seen on film rendezvousing with a missile in flight or stalking and intercepting dummy nuclear warheads during test flights, orbiting it while the missile was traveling some 8,000 miles per hour downrange towards Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific, with the UFO shooting what was described as beams of light at the missile, resulting in the destruction of the booster and dummy warhead payload. If you want to read a really interesting and quite well-researched book about this subject matter that contains these and plenty more case studies of different incidents, including declassified documentation and eyewitness testimony from people who have gone on the record about this topic, I highly suggest giving UFOs and Nukes by author Robert Hastings a look. Redditor 29, Hallucinations at Sea Science. Seeing things at sea when solo round-the-world sailors start to hallucinate. Vendée Globe skipper race sailing yacht C4S10380. So, this has been scientifically explained, but it's intensely creepy. Coming from a family of sailors, both my father and grandfather had similar experiences. My father described an incident where he saw floating coffins covering the entire sea. My grandfather described an incident where a swarm of crows were following the boat, and people riding on motorcycles besides the boat. Redditor 30, okay. The leader of the Church of Scientology is David Miscavige. He is married, but his wife hasn't been seen since August 2007. She used to be seen quite a bit by the public when her husband did things on TV. Redditor 32, the Hoia Baciu forest in Romania. Visitors to the forest often report intense feelings of anxiety and the feeling of being constantly watched. Moreover, the local vegetation is somehow bizarre in appearance, like something out of a make-believe story with strangely shaped trees, and unexplained charring on tree stumps and branches. The forest was named after a shepherd that disappeared in the area with a flock of 200 sheep. Most people who live near the forest are afraid to enter it due to the stories and legends that have been handed down. They believe that those who visit the site will never return back home. Many of the locals who have been brave enough to venture into the forest complained of physical harm, including rashes, nausea, vomiting, migraines, burns, scratches, anxiety, and other unusual sensations. I read one blog where they guess that the presence of copper mines nearby may mean there are heavy metals down below, accounting for electromagnetic activity and other explainable causes for the weirdness. Redditor 34, radio astronomer here. A lot of people have by now heard about the WOW signal, particularly if you hang out a lot on Reddit, but there are many other strange signals we've heard from the sky we can't explain. One cool example is the Great Galactic Burper 3009. In short, back in 1998, radio astronomers pointed towards the galactic center heard 5 loud bursts of radiation that were 10 minutes long or so, with 77 minutes separating the blasts. It was really weird, no one knows what caused it, and no one has ever heard this or a similar burst ever again. Pretty crazy stuff. Redditor 35. The Mary Celeste was an American merchant brigantine that was found adrift and deserted in the Atlantic Ocean, off the Azores Islands, Portugal, on December 4, 1872, by the Canadian brigantine Dei Gratia. She was in a disheveled but seaworthy condition, under partial sail, with no one on board, and her lifeboat missing. The last log entry was dated 10 days earlier. She had left New York City for Genoa on November 7, and on discovery was still amply provisioned. Her cargo of denatured alcohol was intact, and the captain's and crew's personal belongings were undisturbed. None of those who had been on board, the captain and his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the crew of 7, were ever seen or heard from again. Redditor 36. There was an anthropologist in Iceland that disappeared for 7 years. She was found naked in a cave claiming she was kidnapped by elves. Anyone else remember hearing about this? Redditor 37. The Hinterkaifeck murders. A few days prior to the crime, farmer Andreas Gruber told neighbors about discovering footprints in the snow leading from the edge of the forest to the farm, but none leading back. He also spoke about hearing footsteps in the attic and finding an unfamiliar newspaper on the farm. Furthermore, the house keys went missing several days before the murders. None of this was reported to the police prior to the attack. 6 months earlier, the previous maid had left the farm, claiming that it was haunted. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived on the farm on the day of the attack and was killed hours later. Exactly what happened on that Friday evening cannot be said for certain. It is believed that the older couple, as well as their daughter Victoria, and her daughter, Kazilia, were all lured into the barn one by one, where they were killed. The perpetratoress then went into the house where they killed 2-year-old Joseph, who was sleeping in his cot in his mother's bedroom, as well as the maid, Maria Baumgartner, in her bedchamber. Redditor 38. One of my favorites is the Black Triangle UFO seen over Belgium in the late 80s and early 90s. A famous pic. Content uploads 2012-09 Belgian UFO picture.jpg. The Belgian military scrambled F-16s to intercept it, but it was captured on the radar jumping from something like 10,000 feet to 25,000 feet in a single radar blip. It was seen from the ground while being captured on radar. It's a very strong case. Speculation is that it was an advanced military project, but it seems ballsy to test it in public. Redditor 39. I know it's common, but Roswell, man. Why was the first report that it was a flying saucer? If it was just a special weather balloon, why was there such a huge military presence over a large area? Why were so many people threatened to shut up about anything they saw? Why have many grandchildren come out about what their parents revealed to them either later in life or their deathbed that they saw non-human beings in the wreckage? Edit. Oops. Mobile autocorrect, not cancer balloons. Redditor 41. The celestial phenomenon happening over Nuremberg in 1561. It happened randomly in Nuremberg's sky, and it appeared as if it was a type of aerial battle with spheres, cylinders, and at the end of the spectacle, a black triangular object fell from the sky and a crash was heard from outside the city. This still does not have an official explanation. UFO conspiracy theorists everywhere, rejoice. Redditor 43. Skinwalker Ranch is a ranch in northeast Utah where in the 90s the owners reported weird phenomena like giant wolf-like creatures attacking their cattle and taking multiple rifle shots without flinching, then apparently vanishing into thin air, floating orbs of light, Bigfoot-like creatures, cattle mutilations, etc. A team of scientists from the National Institute for Discovery Science, including Colm Kelleher, who wrote a book about the occurrences, camped out on the ranch and reportedly witnessed much of the same, including what appeared to be windows opening into other worlds and a creature climbing through, poltergeist-like, trickster activity, such as a surveillance camera being pulled down and gaffer tape being meticulously unwrapped from the cables, all while an adjacent camera picked up absolutely nothing. The ranch is on land infamous among the local native tribe as being haunted by skinwalkers, supposedly powerful shape-shifting sorcerers, and has a long history of weird happenings going back decades at least. The team of scientists, though they all experienced a lot of weird shit, were never able to gather any robust data to report back to NIDS. They got the feeling whatever they were observing knew it was being observed and did not want to be discovered. The book by Kelleher is Hunt for the Skinwalkers. Science confronts the unexplained at a remote ranch in Utah. It's a damn fascinating read. Redditor 44. When I was a kid, like 2-ish, I had this dream of a man I called Big Daddy because he looked like a large version of my dad. In the dream, he lifted me up over his head, held me there for what seemed like a few seconds, and dropped me. I recall the dream vividly but not the aftermath, which my parents filled me in on. They heard a super loud thud come from my room, so they ran in and found me several feet away from my bed and both my ears were bleeding. My bed was a car bed that was only about a foot off the ground and it had walls on the side to prevent falling out of it. There was no way falling out of my bed would have made that loud of a noise, let alone the likelihood of me falling out of it to begin with. I'm pretty sure I was abducted. After that day, I had extremely vivid nightmares about black panthers, not sure why that creature watching me from outside my window or in the house sometimes. They happened a few times per month and completely stopped when we moved. I remember those dreams more than any other dreams I've ever had in my life. I tell this story all the time as my campfire ghost story, but I've always been tempted to get hypnotic regression therapy to see if I could look past the disguises of whatever it was that was in my dreams to see what was really happening. Redditor 45. A mysterious case from South Korea that had never been solved called the Frog Boys, about a group of boys 5 gone missing without their corpse remaining, nor any evidence found for about 20 years. Even soon after a massive police search in the whole area foot by foot, nothing was found. However, 20 years later, their remaining have been spotted and discovered just right near their home area, which have already been searched for thoroughly. During this period, there were multiple theories and conspiracies. One professor also personally tried playing detective and accused one of the parents for being the offender with some logical contents and accusations. Redditor 46. The death of Elizabeth Short, better known as the Black Dahlia case. After missing for a week, her body was found in Los Angeles, sliced into half, with intestines stuffed under her buttocks, and body appeared to be posed by whoever who dumped her. A Glasgow smile was also carved into her face, extending from the edges of her mouth up to her cheeks. Redditor 47. Michael Negrete. In 1999, this college student just disappeared. This case was never solved. Really eerie. Not sure if true or not, but his brother went on an online forum and gave his opinion. He said he believed Michael was involved with drugs. He thinks Michael got into someone's car that your mother warns you about as a kid the night he disappeared. Redditor 48. After 18 years of teaching junior high school history, my dad became a trucker. Long haul type. He touched the contiguous 48 states. One time he picked up a load from the defunct Hanford nuclear facility to take to Nevada or Arizona. Unlike all the other loads he hauled this time, he had a 2-black SUV Escort. Has to stop at a weigh station. We'll handle this, sir. Has to pull over to check the load. We'll handle this, sir. Dad never found out what he hauled that time. Always struck me as odd, creepy government shenanigans. Redditor 50. Toynbee tiles. They radiate out from a small neighborhood in Philadelphia but have allegedly been found as far as Argentina. It's a weird cryptic message coupled with the fact that they have no idea who the original person was or how the copycats got started. Also the subject of an awesome documentary, Resurrect Dead. Redditor 52. The one where this chick appeared to be running from someone in a hotel, does some weird fucking shit with her hands, then ends up locked inside the water tank on the roof that hadn't been tampered with. Redditor 53. The Monkey Man would have made a great episode. Man of Delhi. Summary from Wikipedia. In May 2001, reports began to circulate in the Indian capital New Delhi of a strange monkey-like creature that was appearing at night and attacking people. Eyewitness accounts were often inconsistent, but tended to describe the creature as about 4 feet 120 centimeters tall, covered in thick black hair, with a metal helmet, metal claws, glowing red eyes and 3 buttons on its chest. Others, however, describe the monkey man as having a more vulpine snout, and being up to 8 feet tall, and muscular. It would leap from building to building like a parkour enthusiast. Still others have described it as a bandaged figure or as a helmeted thing. Theories on the nature of the monkey man ranged from an avatar of the Hindu god Hanuman, to an Indian version of Bigfoot. Many people reported being scratched, and 2 by some reports. 3 people even died when they leapt from the tops of buildings or fell down stairwells in a panic caused by what they thought was the attacker. At one point, exasperated police even issued artists' impression drawings in an attempt to catch the creature. The entire incident has been described as an example of mass hysteria. Redditor 54, the thread a couple weeks ago about what was the freakiest thing that ever happened to you had this story about this guy as a 1920s-ish suit who chased a guy on all 4s in a truck. Pretty insane. I'll go dig it up. Redditor 56, the Taman case. A man washed up on Australia's shores who is completely, and to this day, unidentified. Cause of death unknown, and he was carrying a booklet with him that had a cryptid message that to this day is still without meaning. A suitcase believed to be his was also discovered, with odd objects inside that seemed to make no sense to this man's apparent possession of them, some of the items being red felt slippers, a stenciling brush for marking ship cargo, and a pair of trousers with sand in the cuffs, along with makeshift weapons. Redditor 60, also, these 2 twins in Europe randomly ran onto a highway and were hit by oncoming traffic. There is actual video of this. It's slightly less mysterious because it is due to a very specific type of mental illness, but this article says nothing of what happened to the twin named Ursula. Running onto the motorway. Redditor 64, I used to live in Humboldt County. There is an old Navy research base around there, near Ferndale. When it was operational they said it was used to research whales, but a lot of the officers that were stationed there have admitted since then that that was a lie, and they were watching for Russian subs among other things. None of that is interesting though. The interesting part is since it shut down, several of the officers that had been stationed there have come back to commit suicide. They left their families without a word, no regard for the thousands of miles of travel. They come back to that base and jump off the cliffs. Redditor 74, bit late to the thread but some stories from a book I read years ago and now no longer have a copy of. I think it was called Stranger Than Science by Frank Edwards. Mysterious network of tunnels carved into caves in a South American mountainside. The mystery is the tunnels are way too small for an average-sized adult and children struggle to navigate them. A young woman arrested in the Philippines suspected of being on drugs claimed to be chased by a floating vampire-type creature with bulging red eyes that apparently only she could see. The police thought she was hallucinating until they witnessed punctures marks resembling fangs appearing on her. Early Spanish military explorers on or near a California coast found a human-like skeleton next to an elephant skeleton. The elephant skeletons measured roughly 5-6 feet in height, which has been documented before in the Mediterranean, and the human skeleton was measured to be about 10-11 feet tall. The Spaniards, being deeply religious, buried the skeletons in an unmarked location and believed it to be the work of the devil. Elderly hunters in Siberia talking of seeing woolly mammoths when they were younger. I may have misremembered some of the details from the book, but hopefully I'm fairly accurate. The book had a lot of stories in it, some of which became more well documented, Tunguska for example, but the stories always stuck out too. Must try and find a copy of the book again for myself. Redditor 75, there's one I don't hear often about. And yet it's happened right in the middle of downtown of a major Canadian city. There isn't too many videos of it because it happened before people massively had cell phones, but yeah. Montreal mothership UFO phenomenon over Montreal. This thing was above downtown, seen by reporters and cops and the RCMP along with NASA even being called. It was massive and described as a mothership, stayed up there for 3 hours and the military and airports had no fucking idea what was going on. It then moved east across half the city and caused a power failure. There isn't much about it online as again, this happened in 1990, but yeah. I'm bringing this up as I've lived there for a while, so it's one I heard a lot of talk about, but I think it's pretty weird. Redditor 76, Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia UFO incident. Object fell from sky at night and hit the water near a small fishing village. Local fishermen jumped in boats thinking it was a plane crash but found no evidence of such. There was a strange foam on the water and a glowing object submerged. After a while the object seemed to move up the coast and eventually disappeared. Shortly after military arrived on site. Lots of credible witnesses left with no answers. It's known as Canada's Roswell incident, and given that it was during the Cold War era adds a bit of mystery to it. There was a joint US-Canadian naval radar station in nearby town of Shelburne. Check it out.